You wipe the counter, spray the trail, they're gone, and the next morning there's a new line of them coming from somewhere else entirely. Spraying ants doesn't solve the problem because the ants you can see are not the problem. The colony is. And until you reach the colony, you're just managing a symptom. Here's what's actually happening when you spray a trail of ants and they disappear. The ants you're killing are foragers, worker ants whose job is to leave the nest, find food, and bring it back. They make up a fraction of the total colony. The queen, the brood, the nurse workers, and the vast majority of the population stay underground or inside the nest structure, well protected from anything you're spraying on the surface. When foragers are killed by a spray, the colony doesn't collapse. It registers the loss and sends out new foragers. If the spray has a repellent effect, which most consumer insecticide sprays do, the new foragers simply adjust their route, find a gap in the treated area, and continue operating. In some cases, a repellent spray applied to an indoor ant trail can actually cause the colony to scatter and establish satellite nesting sites in new locations, spreading the infestation further than it was before. The only way to eliminate an ant infestation is to get something into the nest that kills the queen and the brood. And the only practical way to do that without drilling into every wall in your house is to use the ants themselves as the delivery system. That's what bait does, and it's why it works when sprays don't. Boric acid is the active ingredient in both bait recipes covered here, and it's worth understanding what it actually does once ingested, because that mechanism is what makes it appropriate for this application. After an ant consumes boric acid, it travels to the midgut, the primary site of digestion and nutrient absorption. Research using electron microscopy on Argentine ants fed low concentrations of boric acid in sucrose solution showed significant structural damage to the midgut epithelium, damaged microvilli, swollen and destroyed epithelial cells, and increased thickness of the gut lining. The practical result is that the ant's ability to digest and absorb nutrients from food is progressively impaired. The ant continues eating but begins to starve nutritionally. Death follows over the course of days. There are secondary effects as well. Treated ants excrete more liquid waste, which accelerates dehydration and may actually drive them to consume more of the liquid bait, a feedback loop that increases their intake of the active ingredient. Some research also suggests boric acid disrupts gut microbiota, reducing the beneficial bacteria that assist with digestion. None of this is fast, and that's intentional. The slow progression allows the toxin to be shared widely before the first ants begin showing effects. Different ant species, and even the same species under different conditions, prefer either sweet and carbohydrate-based foods or protein and fat-based foods. Offering the wrong attractant means foragers may ignore your bait entirely. Identifying which category your ants fall into determines which recipe to use. A simple test: place a tiny amount of peanut butter or bacon grease and a tiny amount of honey or sugar water near the trail. Check back in 30 minutes and see which one has foragers on it. That preference tells you which bait to mix. Most common household ants, including odorous house ants, pavement ants, Argentine ants, pharaoh ants, and ghost ants, are primarily sugar feeders, especially in warm months. The recipe is simple: 1 tablespoon of honey and 1/4 teaspoon of pure boric acid powder. Mix thoroughly until the boric acid is fully dissolved into the honey. The resulting mixture should be uniform in consistency. The ratio here is deliberately low in boric acid relative to the fat bait. Because ants consume significantly more of a sweet liquid bait than a fat-based one, the same colony-level lethal dose is achieved with less active ingredient per tablespoon of carrier. Using more boric acid in this recipe, even doubling the amount, pushes into concentrations that kill foragers too fast for effective distribution. Use pure boric acid powder at 99% concentration, available at hardware stores. Do not substitute borax. It's a different compound, sodium tetraborate, and is not formulated for this application. Some ant species and most ant colonies during certain seasons when they need protein to raise brood prefer fat and protein sources over sugar. Carpenter ants, grease ants, and many outdoor species in agricultural settings fall into this category. In chicken barns, animal sheds, and garages, this is typically the more effective option. The recipe: 1 tablespoon of bacon grease and 1/2 tablespoon of boric acid powder. Melt or soften the grease. If it's solidified, then mix the boric acid in thoroughly. The concentration here is higher than the sweet bait because ants consume less of a fat-based carrier per feeding event, so a higher proportion of active ingredient is needed to achieve the same colony-level dose. Wear gloves when mixing both recipes. Boric acid can irritate skin and you don't want residue on surfaces that get touched frequently. How you deploy the bait matters as much as the recipe itself. The goal is to put small amounts of bait in locations where foragers are actively traveling, in a format that limits its exposure to children, pets, and non-target animals. Cut drinking straws into segments approximately 1 to 1.5 inches long. Use a pharmacy syringe to fill each segment with the honey boric acid mixture. These small bait tubes can be placed flat against surfaces along ant trails without spilling, are nearly invisible against a baseboard, and are physically too small for most pets to interact with in a way that would result in significant ingestion. Place them along active trails, behind the microwave, along the inside edge of cabinet bases, under the sink around pipe penetrations, along baseboards in the pantry, behind the refrigerator, and near any identified entry points like gaps around pipes or beneath door frames. Use multiple placements throughout the active zone rather than a single large one. More contact points means more foragers picking up bait and more colony-wide distribution in less time. For barn, shed, garage, or outdoor applications, use small plastic containers with lids. The dollar store variety works well. Drill or punch a few small holes in the sides, sized for ant access but too small for larger animals. Add the bacon grease bait inside, secure the lid, and place the stations directly on or adjacent to identified ant trails near feed storage areas, near water sources, and along the base of walls where trails are running. In chicken barns or poultry coops specifically, avoid any aerosol or spray treatment. Birds have highly sensitive respiratory systems and airborne pesticide particles present a genuine risk. Enclosed bait stations are the appropriate tool in those environments. Position multiple stations throughout the active area rather than concentrating them in one spot. In a chicken barn with a significant infestation, 4 to 6 stations spread across the activity zone will produce faster results than the same amount of bait consolidated in one location. Understanding how ants share food explains exactly why a well-made bait is so effective and why the concentration of the active ingredient matters more than most people realize. Ants have a specialized digestive structure called a crop, often called a social stomach, located in the foregut. When a forager finds a liquid food source, it drinks and stores a significant portion in the crop, rather than fully digesting it. A valve called the proventriculus separates the crop from the midgut, allowing the ant to carry a communal food supply back to the nest while still retaining nutrition for itself. Back in the nest, nestmates solicit food by tapping with their antennae and stimulating the donor's mouthparts. The forager opens its mandibles and regurgitates a droplet of crop contents directly into the receiver's mouth. That receiver can then share with another ant, and so on. This process, called trophallaxis, distributes food rapidly through the entire colony in a cascade of exchanges. Studies on Argentine ants have shown that roughly 50% of a donor's crop contents can be transferred in a single exchange event. This means that when a forager picks up a slow-acting bait, carries it back to the nest, and begins sharing through trophallaxis, the active ingredient reaches workers deep in the nest, nurse ants tending the brood, and the queen, all from a single point of surface contact. The speed of the kill is critical. If the boric acid concentration is too high, foragers die before they make it back to the nest or before they've had enough time to share broadly. The bait gets you one dead ant at the station rather than colony-wide distribution. If the concentration is too low, ants consume and share it, but the cumulative dose never reaches a lethal threshold for the colony. The right concentration sits in a window where ants die slowly, over days, giving the toxin time to move through the colony completely before the effects are felt. The first thing most people notice after placing bait stations is that ant activity increases. More foragers appear, concentrated around the bait. This is a good sign. It means the bait is attractive and foragers are actively recruiting more workers to the food source. Recruitment is part of how colonies maximize food collection, and in this case it means more ants are picking up and distributing the boric acid. This increased activity typically peaks within 1 to 3 days and then begins declining as the colony-level effects of the boric acid take hold. The decline is gradual. Don't expect a sharp drop-off. Full colony elimination in a moderate infestation generally takes 1 to 3 weeks depending on colony size, species, and how many bait stations are active. If foragers are not finding the bait within 24 hours, move the stations closer to the identified trail. If you have activity in the area but no interaction with the bait, this is a signal to try the alternative recipe. The ants may be in a protein-seeking phase and ignoring the sweet bait, or vice versa. Refresh bait every 2 to 3 days as it dries out, particularly the honey mixture, which thickens and becomes less accessible over time. Do not spray any pesticide around or near the bait stations. This is one of the most common ways the method gets derailed. A repellent spray applied anywhere near the bait creates a chemical barrier that foragers detect and avoid, cutting off access to the station. If you want to run a spray alongside the bait program, use a non-repellent product like Alpine WSG, a dinotfuran-based water-soluble granule that ants cannot detect and which has its own transfer effect. Apply it as a crack and crevice treatment at baseboards and entry points, away from the bait placements themselves, and allow it to dry completely before allowing pets or children back into the area. Once the active infestation has been eliminated, a few steps make reinfestation significantly less likely. Sanitation is the foundation. Ants enter homes following chemical trails laid down by foragers who found a food source. Eliminating those food sources removes the signal that brings new foragers in. Store food, including pet food, in sealed airtight containers. Clean up spills immediately. Rinse recyclables before putting them out. Wipe down the exterior of honey jars, syrup bottles, and anything else sticky that might be sitting in a cabinet. Moisture matters too. Many ant species are drawn to areas with available water, under sinks with slow drips, around dishwasher connections, along pipes with condensation. Fixing minor leaks and keeping those areas dry removes a resource that's often as important to a colony as food. Exclusion reduces entry points. Use silicone caulk to seal gaps along baseboards, around pipe penetrations, beneath window and door frames, and anywhere else you've observed ants entering. Ants follow pheromone trails into structures through remarkably small openings. A gap at the base of a door frame or a crack around a utility pipe is sufficient. Sealing those points after eliminating the active colony prevents the next colony from establishing the same entry route. To summarize the complete method, identify whether your ants prefer sweet or protein-based bait with a simple preference test. Mix the appropriate boric acid recipe at the correct ratio. Low enough that foragers survive long enough to return and share, high enough that the cumulative dose reaches the queen. Deploy in small protected stations placed directly on active trails throughout the infested area. Avoid any repellent sprays near the bait. Expect increased activity initially, followed by a gradual decline over 1 to 3 weeks. Refresh the bait every 2 to 3 days until activity has stopped. The reason this works when sprays don't is that it uses the ant's own food-sharing biology to deliver the active ingredient into the colony rather than trying to eliminate the population, one forager at a time on the surface. If you found this useful, subscribe for more practical, research-based pest control content. We'll see you in the next video.